I have largely not covered the previews from Ixalan because, quite frankly, I get tired of it. The release schedule is so jammed and there's so many cards. If I covered every single card during a preview season, my beard would probably look unkept like saffron olives. So what I try to do is just cover things when I think they're interesting or fun, and there is something interesting about Ixalan spoilers. There appears to be a little bit of power creep going on, and by a little bit I mean lots of small bits. The example, we've got Sarah Avenger among multiple other cards all getting power crept in this set. Before we continue on and talk about the cards in particular and then talk about the idea of power creep in the second part of the video, I do want to clarify that I don't think the world is over, the game is not dying, these cards are not broken, and the sky is not falling. Every time I talk about the printing of new cards that are the best in their class or a better version of something else, people think I'm being really over the top. Maybe the thumbnail to this video is over the top, but what I'm doing here is just wanting to talk about power creep in general, this concept of micro creeps, if you will, small ones that all compound and build up and create a game that is pushing towards a higher power level. But first, if you want to pick up a single product or sealed product, use the link in the description below or the code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order and to help support the show over at coolstuffinc.com. And beyond that, if you like the stuff that I put out, why don't you check out Patreon? There's a link down in the description below. For $2 a month, you can get onto my Discord server, become part of the community, and get involved there. We're about to launch Historic Brawl as a league on there, a 6-week league, with a credit prize at Cool Stuff for first and second place. And you can enter that if you're on the Patreon. Let's start with the most obvious power creep of the lot of them, where there's just no argument about it. We have Morton to Collapse, a 2-mana black and red sorcery that says choose one, and if you descended this turn, you may choose both instead. The options are destroy target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target non-creature, non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. To explain descend, it says you descended if a permanent card was put into your graveyard from anywhere. So Morton Collapse is a power crept dreadmaw, and dreadmaw was always a discussion around whether or not it was a power crept version of Terminate. Of course, between Terminate and dreadmaw, the big difference is that the dreadmaw is sorcery speed whilst the Terminate is instant, and that was a sizable difference. But in this case, Morton Collapse is just dreadmaw with upside. It is dreadmaw with a second mode. It is dreadmaw that has 2 abilities if you descend at this turn, like for example cracking a fetch land or losing a creature in combat. So weirdly, Terminate still applies and is still useful in some ways, but dreadmaw is just a worse version of Morton Collapse. Now of course in singleton formats like Historic Brawl or Gladiator or Highlander or Commander or any of those things, then playing both copies is an option. This gives you 2 options of the same effect, which is relevant for the large body of singleton formats that get played these days. But ultimately this marks the retirement, the death of dreadmaw in constructed Magic. Now it's not been a big card for a very long time. It still remains a few dollars because it has seen some play here and there as a clean 2-mana answer to planeswalkers, but now you have that which can also destroy an Amulet of Vigor or Utopia Sprawl or an Aether Vial or something similar when you kill a planeswalker creature with it. And the reason I wanted to bring up all of this is that this and all the other ones I'm going to talk about in this video, these are all small micro elements of power creep. Morton Collapse being better than dreadmaw in a vacuum is not an issue. And I'm not saying all of these combined in this set are an issue, but if we add up every small bit of power creep, it begins to really eat up the real estate that we have available to us. Every small bit of power creep we get, more and more of Magic's history becomes unplayable or not good enough, and it leaves us less room in the future until we have to really jump the shark and jump power levels up, kind of like we've seen with things like Modern Horizons. Lots of compound micro power creeps leads to the necessity for something like Modern Horizons. And don't forget, Modern Horizons 3 is on the horizon. I've said horizon like 4 times in that paragraph. And I guess we should address the elephant in the room as well, or should I say dinosaur in the room. Colossal Dreadmaw has been power crept in a way. The meme that is the 6-mana 6/6 with trample in green as a draft card has been powered up into the uncommon slot. Not that you can tell because the set symbol for the set is very bad at telling you rarity. But this is the uncommon Dreadmaw, a 6-mana 6/6 trample that says when it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other dinosaur you control. Now, this is evidently power creep in the sense that it's a more powerful version of Colossal Dreadmaw. However, However, it's an important point and distinction to make is that this is rarity power creep. So in a sense, there is a theory that a common version of a card would be more powerful if it were uncommon, and the same would go for if it became rare or mythic. So this is just the uncommon version of this effect. It gives you some extra utility, it gives you some card draw. There are circumstances where rarities are defined because of just trying to balance a limited environment, or because of arbitrary rules around how commander products show rarity. But on the whole, the rarer the card, the more powerful it should be as a version of that effect. This isn't strictly true. I mean, Thoughtseize isn't totally the rare version of Inquisition. Hell, Inquisition is better than Thoughtseize in small situations. But I did think it would be completely absolutely ridiculous to even consider talking about power creep in Ixalan without at least addressing Colossal Dreadmaw getting a glow up into the uncommon slot. Truth be told, I fear for this world when we finally get the rare or the mythic Dreadmaw. And then we've got another not strict upgrade, but it is a form of power creep. Guardian of the Great Door is a more power and more toughness-ified version of Serra Avenger. They're both double white pipped creatures with flying, Serra Avenger being a 3/3 and Guardian of the Great Door being a 4/4. Serra Avenger says you can't cast on the first, second or third turn of the game, a weird thing to track that they probably will never return to, where Guardian of the Great Door has a similar mechanic, but it says as an additional cost, so in order to cast this, you must tap 4 untapped artifacts, creatures or lands. But of course, both of them can be put into play off of an Aether Vial. Aether Vial was used historically to make Serra Avengers much earlier in Legacy, and Serra Avenger carries an equipment better than most, because it has vigilance and flying, so it can carry a Jit into combat and have it on blocks, or attack with a Sword of Fire and Ice and still be a blocker afterwards to kill a Delver. Now, the reason this isn't a strict upgrade and a strict piece of power creep is that Guardian of the Great Door doesn't have vigilance and thus cannot attack and block. It's not both an aggressive and a defensive creature like Serra Avenger is. The interesting thing is that Serra Avenger doesn't really see any play anymore because it's been power crept out of Magic. And the really funny thing is that giving it extra power and toughness, making it a turn 3 or turn 2, 4/4 or whatever, doesn't actually make it powerful enough. It's not big enough. The vigilance is a bit of a killer. The vigilance has always been a big reason why Serra Avenger is good, getting into combat and also being able to still block a hasty threat out of an aggro deck, or a Delver, for example, when the opponent untaps and swings back with it. But I still want to go back to that point that making a 2-mana 4/4 off of an Aether Vial with 2 counters on it probably isn't good enough. It survives Lightning Bolt, which used to be one of the litmus tests for whether a creature was good enough. But again, power creep has now led us to the point of, does it survive Unholy Heat? Or I guess more accurately for Modern and Legacy now, does it survive the ETB trigger of Fury? The answer to both those questions is no. I had a conversation recently with a friend over dinner where we were joking about where Magic was going in terms of power creep and how good Grief and Fury were, and what we'd like to see in the green and white parts of the colour pipe in Modern Horizons 3 and other straight to Modern and Legacy and Eternal like style formats, or sets should I say. And we come to this conclusion that you can have a Locked On Smiter, a 3-mana 4/4 when discarded by an enemy effect puts it straight into play, and this is not good enough. This thing would need to be like a 7/7 or maybe even an 8/8 to actually be playable. If this was a 6/6 for 3 mana, it probably still wouldn't be good enough to see play. It would need to dodge the big removal spells. And whilst we're on this point, something I'd love to see in this space is not only the text of if it was discarded by an enemy effect, put it into play, like Locked On Smiter, but a second line of text that says you can cast this spell for free this turn if your opponent has looked at your hand. So that way, if you're getting griefed, you are getting this spell for free. At that point, we can probably make it a 3/3 or a 4/4 again or whatever, right? It doesn't have to be a 7/7 to dodge all the removal. I genuinely believe a 3-mana 7/7, even if it had some extra text like Locked On Smiter does, where if discarded into play, I still don't think it'd see play in Modern and Legacy. Maybe just about. And that's kind of one of the points, right? As we slightly power creep bits here and there, or we power creep a lot of things all at once with Modern Horizons, we get to the situation now where we have to power creep something else to contend with it. It's difficult. Game design's not easy. Then we have Get Lost, a 2-mana instant speed destroy target creature, enchantment or planeswalker, and its controller makes 2 maps. Map tokens are artifacts that have an activate ability for 1 mana where you tap to sacrifice the artifact, target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. This is obviously a power crept version of Fateful Absence, which can destroy only planeswalkers and creatures. However, this can hit enchantments too, and instead of giving your opponent a clue, which is 2 mana draw a card, it's giving them 2 map tokens that are 1 mana tap, sometimes draw a land, otherwise put the card into the bin and put a counter on a creature you control. Something I hadn't really realised when thinking about these maps was that you actually need a creature in play to explore with them. I thought it was activate map, look at card, if it's a non-land then we put a counter on a creature we control. Turns out, no. Obviously that creature is the one doing the exploring, so you can't even crack these maps if you don't have a creature in play. Further to this, the maps are sorcery speed too, so you can't even hold your mana up for removal, counter magic, flash spells, collect a company or whatever, and then crack them in your opponent's end step, but then do anything that you can with clues. Maps require you to use the resource in your turn, so trying to put this onto a creature land, for example, if you're playing control, is very rough because it costs you a lot of mana. So I'm starting to think that maps are just so much worse than, say, a clue. Now, of course, this is 2 mana, so it doesn't quite get to the 1 mana premium plowshares or path to exile territory, but I think Get Lost is actually better than Fatefully Absent, which is a pretty good removal spell anyway. I think Get Lost might be the best 2 mana white removal spell we've ever seen, and one of, if not the best 2 mana removal spells in any colour. It's obviously comparable to Assassin's Trophy. Now, Assassin's Trophy has the ability to hit basically anything, including lands, which is a massive upside for this, and artifacts, which Get Lost quite purposefully and evidently doesn't hit. Assassin's Trophy does give them a land immediately though, which is a much bigger upside than the maps. So we have this sort of weird tension as to which one's better. But of course they're 2 different colours, one is double coloured, one is mono-coloured, so that gets into the area of balancing them too. But I just couldn't believe it when I saw this. This feels so powered up compared to what we've seen for the last 3 or 4 standard sets. Well, since Dominaria United, I guess. How many standard sets is that? It's probably only a couple. And I think the reason we're seeing powered up Morton collapses and Get Lost and stuff is because the answers need to be better in order to face off against more powerful threats. When you push a mid-range card like a Sheoldred, the power creep involved to try and offset that and to balance that within the environment has to come in the answers to that. It's a lot more difficult to really balance around mid-range sludgy cards. Historically speaking, when something like Lingering Souls was dominant in standard, they could print Thundermaw Hellkite into the set 2 blocks later into the format, and that would solve the issue. It is much easier to balance X1s and 1-1s and such than it is your 4-5 mid-range value beaters and such. It's an interesting point because the prof mentioned in his complexity creep video recently that 3 Ragavans can be blocked by 1 Orcish Bowmaster, and thus Ragavan has been power crept out of Modern not long after it was the big boogeyman of the format. I don't think that's power creep as such. I think that's genuinely a metagame evolution. It's not that there's just like super duper more powerful, better things. I guess it's just that Orcish Bowmaster warps the format and is good at killing X1s. I guess it's a bit semantic as to whether or not that's a metagame change, a warping of the format, which is a more severe version of a metagame change, or if it's just power creep. And the last example in Ixalan of some quite severe power creep is Belligerent Yearling, which is a 2 mana red dinosaur. It's a 3/2 with trample. So already, without reading any more text, this is already power creep. I went through and looked for every single 2 mana bear. Bearing in mind, a 2 mana bear coming in, I think it was Eldritch Moon, was a big deal. It was the first time I'd ever seen a 2 mana 2/2. Up until that point, there were downsides. From there, the gates were opened and we've had power creep up the arsehole since War of the Spark, right? So we've got more and more powerful red 2-drops. Lots of 3/1s with extra abilities like Voltaic Visionary, for example. But did you know that Belligerent Yearling is one of only 2 3/2s I could find? The other one is a Modern Horizons card, so you can expect it to be pretty strong and pretty power crept. Orcish Hellraiser is a 2 mana 3/2 that has echoes. You have to pay another mana next turn, so effectively 3 mana for this 3/2. But does this thing that when it dies, it does 2 damage to the player, so it's kind of like it's got an extra aggressive slant to it. But again, this has trample and it's a 3/2. It's a buff rate and it's got trample and it's a relevant creature type, and that dinosaurs have in creature type synergies. And then we read the text. Whenever another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Belligerent Yearling's base power become equal to that creature's power until end of turn. So now we have the most aggressively statted 2 mana red creature of all time, a 3/2 with trample, and then it can become a 6/6 or a 7/7 or whatever, depending on what you cast on turns 3, 4, 5, and 6 into your what's the undead black one? I'll put it on screen now. This dinosaur here, for example, and there's a new one in the new set too. The most comparable card to Belligerent Yearling is Eldrazi Mimic, which was a 2 mana 2/1 that was a problem card in standard and other formats, mainly because Eldrazi were too cheap to play off all the broken lands that came with them. But either way, it's comparable to that, and that was a 2/1 that died to X1 hate, easier to balance. This is a 3-2. Long gone are the days of Pygmy Allosaurus, which is the first dinosaur ever printed in Magic. A 3-mana 2-2 with Swamp Walking green. But like Pugnacious Hammerskull was just getting printed a 3-mana 6-6, so this can easily have 6 power on turn 3, allow you to slap people with a 6-2 Trampler. Trample making it even better because it gives some evasion to those stats that you can pump into it via other dinosaurs. The fact that its toughness doesn't change, I had to check them. The fact that its toughness doesn't change is a balancing factor because it can then be blocked and killed even if you are taking some trampling damage. And this isn't going to like break a format. I mean, dinosaurs might actually be a good aggro deck with something like this. It's a very good 2-drop. There's a lot of other things that have to align there. Can they be a shouldered, for example? But the point I'm getting at is that it's another unusually like small area of power creep. And when you stack them all together, it does push the average power level of a format. Ultimately, I can't come down to decide whether or not this is just continuing power creep in Magic, an issue we've had since perhaps around War of the Spark, Throne of Eldraine, before Modern Horizons 1 around that time when things just got out of hand, or if it's a case of the power level has been tuned down in recent time, but certain cards absolutely dominate Standard and Pioneer, and now we need to up that power level again to make some things impactful through the Fable of the Mirror Breakers and the Shieldreds. Power creep is a difficult thing to manage for any game that is long-standing, and Magic is 30 years old at this point. And you've got to remember that what power creep is a symptom of is not only trying to make the new stuff relevant, but it's to keep the audience engaged with each release, to see a thing that tantalizes their taste buds and feels exciting. You can do this through exciting themes and flavour and sort of innovation in design space as well, battles for example, or you can do this by making cards just better than the old ones. And the third category is the best way to appeal to competitive players, which is, although a small part of the market, still a part of the market that Wizards seem to care about, otherwise they wouldn't be trying to rejig Standard. I guess the problem becomes even more of an issue when you layer on other things that are happening to Magic. Power creep has always been something you've had to wrestle with, and I think it's wrestled with kind of poorly over the last 3 to 4 years. Magic has power crept like this. Like if you look at Modern or Legacy now, they're unrecognizable to even 5 years ago. But the other issue is just the absolute plethora, the absolute shit ton of releases, meaning that every single set is vying for part of this power pie to be viable. Look at the complexity of and powerful but unique mechanics in the Commander products, for example. Cyberman Conversion is probably, if not the best version of the reality shift blue transform your creature into another thing effect we've ever seen. It is double blue to balance out a little bit, but basically it can turn someone's commander face down and make it very hard for them to get their commander back. Incredibly strong, and again, a bit of pushing there. And in essence, seeing things pushed in each set is normal to an extent. A small bit of pushing here and there each set. I guess when we get so many sets and so many cards printed, those pushes become more numerous and they start to mount up faster and faster. And then to go off the back of what Prof said in his latest video, other than the Ragavan thing, is that cards are more complicated than they ever have been before. It's something that I want to do a video on, is just sheer number of words over time. I need to get some data for this probably. But cards are not only getting more and more powerful, but they're getting more and more wordy. So the game is getting more complicated, having to grok things. There's more and more releases and there's more and more push to power level. And I just think that's a big strain on the game. The sky is not falling. I repeat that, the sky is not falling. But I think these are some really fascinating examples of power creep within Magic. I'm excited to play with the new cards. I really can't wait for it. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I would ask you if you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but I'm not making a mountain at all. I'm just talking about the ongoing power creep and how that gets compounded heavier and heavier with a bigger and bigger or more filled and more stacked release schedule. Don't forget to check out my Patreon in the link down below if you want to get involved with the Historic Brawl League. That's getting announced on my Discord tomorrow, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.